My relatives have maintained ownership of a 50-acre homestead just beyond the metropolitan boundaries for over a century. It has always been a tranquil sanctuary where we have reared livestock and cultivated various crops. That tranquility was disrupted when a new subdivision of grandiose homes was constructed adjacent to our land a few years ago. These upscale residences were governed by their own homeowners association, led by a board comprising some of the most self-important and meddlesome individuals imaginable. Initially, I attempted to steer clear of any disputes, but they seemed bent on complicating my existence from the outset. The issues began with trivial grievances about my livestock causing disturbances or leaving waste near the boundary fence. It was irrelevant that my farm had existed 100 years before their neighborhood. I courteously informed them that cows would behave as cows and requested that they cease harassing my animals. Matters worsened when they started issuing violation notices concerning the unattractive state of my barn and storage sheds. Their regulations stipulated that structures on my land needed to be freshly painted and meticulously maintained. I explained that while their standards might apply within their own development, I was not required to decorate my barns to match their preferences. Subsequently, they began to bother me about a modest footbridge I had constructed over the creek separating our properties. The bridge provided convenient access to the rear pasture where my cattle grazed. Since it was built from roughly hewn timber, rather than the brick or wrought iron used in their ornamental bridges, they deemed it an eyesore. I firmly told them that they had absolutely no authority over what I did on my private property. If they were displeased with the appearance of my farm, they should not have established their subdivision beside it. This was the turning point when the new Homeowners Association president, a woman I'll refer to as Karen, decided to escalate the situation. One day, I stepped outside to find a crew dismantling the footbridge with chainsaws on my property. I hurried over, yelling for them to stop as they were destroying my private land. The foreman merely shrugged and stated they had been contracted by the Homeowners Association to remove an unauthorized structure. When I insisted on seeing the permits, he directed me to speak with Karen. She stood nearby with a smug expression, arms crossed while overseeing the demolition. I confronted her directly, accusing her of trespassing and vandalizing my property. She dismissed my claims, asserting that the bridge was a safety hazard that needed to be removed. I highlighted that the bridge was over 100 feet from the nearest Homeowners Association residence and thus outside their jurisdiction. However, Karen arrogantly maintained that anything potentially visible from association property was under their control. Realizing she was unwilling to reason, I took out my phone to call the sheriff. Before we continue with the story, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's my dream to once reach 1,000 subscribers. Hope you can help me reach this dream. Now back to the story. As soon as I began dialing, Karen signaled her team, and they quickly grabbed their saws and fled in their trucks. Once the vandals had left, I assessed the damage. They had completely cut through the support beams, causing the bridge to collapse into the creek. Enraged, I researched the laws and confirmed that the Homeowners Association had no authority over my private property beyond their boundaries. I promptly contacted a lawyer who assured me I had a strong case for suing for damages. A week later, I sent a letter to the Homeowners Association board demanding they pay $5,000 to replace my bridge or face legal action. I clearly outlined the facts. They had unlawfully trespassed and destroyed property outside their jurisdiction. Karen responded with an antagonistic letter stating they would not contribute financially since the bridge was considered an eyesore that needed removal. She argued that the bridge detracted from the subdivision's upscale ambiance and threatened to eliminate any future structures they found displeasing. Fortunately, I had photographic evidence and multiple witnesses to the association's unlawful actions. My lawyer successfully obtained a judgment in my favor, which I made sure to emphasize to Karen's dismayed expression. Ultimately, the Homeowners Association was required to pay $8,000 to reconstruct my bridge and restore the creek bed. Additionally, I took satisfaction in installing a substantial privacy fence around the perimeter of my property. Karen learned the hard lesson that one cannot simply override others' rights and property under the guise of maintaining appearances. The Homeowners Association now understands that they have no authority over my land. As for me, I'm pleased that I stood up against their harassment and sense of entitlement. Justice prevailed in the end. After my second retirement, I ventured into property management and purchased a 500-square-foot luxury residence with the sole purpose of renting it out. Initially unaware of how problematic the homeowners association was, I quickly discovered their nature. Within 2 years, Karen had developed issues with virtually everyone in the neighborhood. Leaving out trash cans? Fined. Playing loud music after 10 p.m.? Fined. Hosting an unauthorized yard sale? Fined. Removing dead plants and replanting without consent? Fined. The cycle continued. While community members could run for the Homeowners Association board, the board preferred to appoint the president. 6 out of 10 board members were supporters of Karen, ensuring her position remained secure. Her husband worked in the medical sector, earning a substantial income. She earned the nickname Queen Karen in the neighborhood for her relentless issuance of fines. I used to personally collect rent from friends who rented my property, often doing so with music playing softly in the garage. One evening, Karen approached in her golf cart, insisting that the music was too loud, despite it being only 8 p.m. and within permissible limits until 10 p.m. She demanded that I lower the volume. My friends and I continued to enjoy our time, leading her to become angry and fine me. Unlike most, I refused to accept the abuse and contested the fine with the Homeowners Association board, ultimately winning the case. From then on, Queen Karen made it her mission to undermine me, complaining about every minor issue. While I resisted as much as possible, I did end up paying some fines. She also targeted my tenants, exacerbating the situation. One night, during a discussion with my friends about the ongoing problems, we witnessed Karen returning home and embracing a man who wasn't her husband. This suggested she was unfaithful. My friends and I informed Karen's husband, who likely investigated, leading to their divorce 3 months later as he moved out. Rumors spread that Queen Karen received nothing from the divorce because she was the one who cheated and was unemployed, making her ineligible for support. Following the divorce, Karen's quality of life significantly declined. She sold her car for a cheaper model and changed her dressing style. Even after the separation, she remained unemployed and continued to live somewhat comfortably. By February 1986, the Homeowners Association under Karen's leadership was imposing fines for trivial infractions and increasing monthly dues. Improper trash can placement or outdated vehicles were frequent targets. The community grew weary of Karen and the association's oppressive actions, leading us to voice our grievances at the next meeting. Karen justified the increases by claiming the community had neglected repairs and that higher dues and fines were necessary for maintenance. Upon reviewing the budget report, none of us had read it initially, treating it as junk mail. However, we thoroughly examined the document and discovered that Karen had increased the Homeowners Association budget by 15%, with unclear allocations for the additional funds. Confronting her at her home yielded no answers, as she refused to disclose where the extra money was being spent and retreated to watch TV. In response, we filed a joint lawsuit to uncover the financial discrepancies. By June, we uncovered the truth. Queen Karen had been embezzling funds from the Homeowners Association to avoid seeking employment. Once exposed, she was charged with fraud and extortion. Together with the neighbors, we filed a lawsuit against Karen for reimbursement. Due to her lack of funds, Karen had to mortgage her house to compensate us all. She was subsequently sentenced to 6 years in federal prison without parole. With no one maintaining her house, the bank foreclosed, and a new owner took possession. When she was released in 1992, Karen found herself homeless. Most of us did not wish for such severe consequences, but her relentless imposition of fines and theft left us no choice. Had she moderated the excessive fines, we might have let her be, but her refusal led her to steal from us instead of seeking employment like everyone else. I work at a well-known home supply and maintenance store. To protect privacy, I won't mention the store's name, but to provide context. About a month ago, Karen and her husband visited to purchase an appliance. They arrived on a particularly busy day with only 2 staff members handling appliances, one of whom was about to take lunch break. Karen became upset when a couple of men who had been waiting longer were served before her and threw a tantrum. She even confronted a female employee who was leaving for lunch, berating her for supposedly ignoring her. The employee explained multiple times that she wasn't on duty, but Karen insisted that it didn't matter and demanded immediate assistance. The employee offered her the option to wait or take her business elsewhere, continuing her tasks. This clearly irritated Karen and her husband, leading him to call customer service. I was covering their desk at the time and began yelling at him, claiming he was a GD man, and that if we prioritized other men before his wife, we should serve him first. I laughed at his remark, explained that wasn't how things operated, and ended the call. Our store does not tolerate abuse, and management generally supports this stance. The amusing part? Our town has a local Facebook page for reviews and events. Karen decided to make a significant post about the incident, but she didn't follow through. Instead, she distorted the story to appear as though she had been deliberately ignored. In reality, she simply didn't want to wait in line and was denied service. She had confronted and cursed out a teenage employee who was off duty, and both she and her husband had been verbally abused by every employee in the store. They had spoken to both the girl and me, and neither of us had mistreated them. In truth, we were both subjected to abuse. Initially, Karen garnered some sympathy from women who shared her mindset and frustrations about employment issues. However, one of our cashiers learned about the situation and informed me. Being petty by nature, I created a fake Facebook account, since I rarely engage with social media beyond lurking on Reddit, and joined the town's page. I first posted a detailed account of the actual events, including direct quotes from the female employee. To further discredit Karen, I duplicated my post and responded to every comment on her original post with factual corrections. This exposed the truth about what had occurred. Karen had confronted and cursed out employees who were not at fault. Within moments, the entire community turned against her, with hundreds of comments labeling her a liar and a terrible person. By the next morning, her post had been removed, and she never returned to our store. Was I somewhat of a Karen myself? Perhaps. However, when it comes to supporting my coworkers, I prefer to handle petty issues with similar tactics. Thanks to this incident and several others, I've become the go-to person for dealing with difficult customers when my colleagues need managerial assistance. A few years ago, just over a year after graduating high school, I participated in a transition to work program called Nova Employment and began gaining work experience to build my initial resume. I struggled to find success in various jobs until I started at a tow bar manufacturing plant, where I impressed my supervisors with my ability to cut and smooth the sharp edges of tow bars. Essentially, I was applying the woodworking skills from high school to a metalworking job, which proved effective, and I was on track to secure an official position there. The boss was very patient, professional, and supportive, teaching me everything I needed to know. I was progressing towards welding as I showed interest during breaks. My father even shared how my grandfather, who had sadly passed away 5 years prior, had done the same in his first job and expressed pride in me. However, about 2 months later, I was summoned to the manager's office, expecting to be officially hired part-time. Instead, I was informed that they couldn't afford to hire me permanently because they were planning to sell and shut down the business. It was the work equivalent of, "It's not you, it's me." After finishing my last day, I found myself back on the Nova employment job hunt. Shortly after, I secured a position at a fiberglass factory located on an old, abandoned army base. On my first day, I was introduced to my supervisor, a man with extensive scar tissue on his right arm, possibly from a shark attack. After introductions and the mandatory workplace tour, he handed me a bottle and a rag, instructing me to wax polish that fiberglass container. I was extremely confused and felt completely lost about what was expected of me. He asked, "What's wrong? Do your wax polishing thing." I replied that I didn't know how. He responded, "Don't you wax polish metal?" I explained that I had been cutting and smoothing sharp metal edges with a grinder, which we referred to as metal polishing for simplicity. My boss then told me to complete my task and brought the Nova employment agent who had placed me into his office. I overheard them having a loud argument that resonated throughout the entire factory, marking the first red flag. Following that confrontation, I was sent home after only 1 day as the boss wanted to assess my capabilities. The next day, things began to deteriorate. I started with wax polishing, which was manageable, but soon I was assigned to clean bins. I heard him yelling at other employees for inefficiency, despite the workforce comprising individuals with various disabilities, including myself. Another red flag. The following day, I was tasked with sorting tools, but I couldn't understand the instructions. When I asked for clarification to ensure I was performing correctly, he became angry, exclaiming, "Why the heck did I bother hiring you if I have to do your job for you?" He then assigned me to rake dirt beside the factory building, explicitly warning me about the snakes, and handed me the rake. Another red flag. The next morning, instead of clocking in for my shift, I walked to the nearest bus stop and had a brilliant idea. If he wanted the job done, fine, I would do it my way. I returned to work, clocked in to start my shift, and strangely, he didn't seem to notice my slight tardiness as he was busy yelling at other employees. I began sweeping, and then he called me over to clean the entire bathroom. I asked, "Where's the mop and bucket?" He replied, "There is no mop and bucket. Use the fire hose and grab a rag." He directed me to the fire hose and left me to it while he continued to berate another employee. Attempting to seek assistance yielded no results, so I focused on the task. I positioned the hose to point outside the bathroom window to prevent excessive spraying, but when I turned it on, water dispersed everywhere, soaking the toilets, floors, walls, roof, and even the toilet paper. The bathroom sounded like it was being flooded from the outside, making me hesitant to enter initially. Eventually, I entered to find the fire hose wreaking havoc, spraying gallons of water indiscriminately. I desperately tried to mitigate the situation, but it only worsened. Reluctantly, I turned off the hose and retracted it back into the wall mount. Observing the bathroom, I realized it was in such disarray that even renowned personalities like Lano and Amp Woodley would be impressed. Afterward, I took my lunch break and proceeded with my shift as if nothing had happened. The following Monday, Christmas came early when Nova Employment informed me that I was fired, prompting me to exclaim, "Oh my sweet Jesus, there is a God." I could only imagine the expression on my boss's face, but the constant verbal abuse from him and his treatment of my coworkers made it worthwhile. I, Trans M16, recently noticed a decline in the number of calls I was receiving from my father. At first, I didn't pay much attention to it. I was actually relieved to have fewer calls from him. To provide some background, I was glad to have a break from him because he isn't a good person. My father was my first bully. He instilled insecurities in me when I was too young to understand why he resented my chubbiness. He mocked my afro, even though he also has one. Soon after, he began beating me for the smallest infractions, such as getting a C on a test or having a messy room. I was beaten until I was black and blue and bleeding, with lasting marks on my back from his abuse. I endured it all, hoping he would eventually change, until this year. I shared my experiences online, but after a major argument with my mother about the abuse I endured as a child and my mental health, he called me expressing hatred, wishing I hadn't been born, and threatening to beat me and treat me like a real man. The police didn't intervene when he made these threats, forcing us to hide because I knew he was serious and I wasn't going to confront him physically. After he apologized, saying he was sorry I felt mistreated and that he was stressed, I decided to minimize all contact. It was challenging, but I managed to do so. When he stopped texting and calling me daily, I thought he might have finally understood. However, my mother discovered this week that he went to his family and his new girlfriend, claiming that I had cut him off because of my mother and that I was doing it to extract money from him. He couldn't believe he had raised such a terrible person, even though he had no money. I was taken aback because he doesn't have any financial resources. He hasn't supported me or my younger siblings for months. We need shoes, socks, glasses, medications, and clothing as we grow. Yet he hasn't contributed a single penny. He accused his own son of being a gold digger, but there was no wealth to exploit. He likened me to Christopher Columbus, saying I drained all his money and forced him to leave my life. But he doesn't have money to drain, and I didn't force him out. I tried tirelessly to make him happy. I played basketball, leading us to undefeated records despite hating the sport. Still, it was never enough. After his last threat, I didn't want to give him another chance. Now, his family, his girlfriend, and her children despise me for being an a-hole. They supported him in blocking me on all platforms, effectively cutting me off too. I'm utterly confused and astonished by how delusional someone has to be to claim they were a good father while behaving like a toddler. Why even bother? You're broke, you abuse your children, and you don't even own a home. Why would I want to exploit that? My father is a 6'5" muscular black man who criticizes black women for being overly sensitive. Yet when confronted with the abuse he inflicted on me, he acts tough and tries to silence me. Sir, please, you and your friends, stop walking around with your pants sagging like you're trying to see whose butt is bigger. I don't want to hear accusations of me gold-digging my own father when he can't afford McDonald's. I just needed to vent because it's incredibly surprising. Thank you for listening. I would greatly appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.